Hello and happy Friday. My name is Keith Walsh and this is MOTH News Live. You're very welcome back. We're here every Friday from 3 o'clock. We also have some podcasts you can find wherever you get your podcasts. They used to say available in all good bookstores. Now they say wherever you get your podcasts. There's one should be going up today, an interesting conversation with a young man called Tig Hickey, which we will be talking about. Philip had interviewed him during the week he's got his own, Philip, the way he is, he's got to have his own special area of the podcast. Like we got the MOTH podcast and we got Unvetted, which is Philip's little sanctuary, and he interviews some interesting people. We'll chat about that later because it is an interesting story. He went to a funeral in Lebanon and there was a couple of pieces on two of the big newspapers in Ireland. And not that we're like here on MOTH, we're just, the reason we're here is to sort of, reveal maybe the workings of the news or read between the lines. We're not necessarily taking sides. We're not supporting anybody or not supporting anybody. We have our own personal views. I mean, do I support Hamas? Do I support Hezbollah? Well, I tell you what, I'm against killing generally. So whoever's doing the most killing, I'm kind of anti them. Do you know what I mean? So I think that's Israel at the moment, but you wouldn't know. Could be America. So we will be talking to Philip about that interview with Tig, and we should have a clip if I remember to upload it. I probably didn't. Anyway, some of the news that we need to be aware of today. The Irish pharmaceutical sector is facing a major challenge as US President Donald Trump has announced a 25% tariff on pharmaceuticals manufactured outside the US. It's not great news for Ireland because we kind of nailed our colours to that mast, really. We kind of all our hopes are in the pharmaceutical boat, and hopefully they won't pull out. And if they do, surely the government will have a plan. They're probably foreseen this. They've probably worked on something. I'd say they're probably supporting loads of startups in Ireland so that they get to a point where we don't need those big US pharmaceuticals. Yeah, I'm joking. I don't think they have a plan at all. Finance Minister Paschal Donohoe has called the proposed tariffs deeply concerning. I think you need to be a bit more worried than deeply concerned, and is seeking urgent diplomatic talks to mitigate the impact. Well, you see, I suppose a few years ago, Pascal, we could have been doing stuff. We possibly could have foreseen this. I mean, it could have happened anyway. I mean, it just so happens to be Donald Trump. So that'll be interesting. And our thoughts and prayers are with the people who work in the pharmaceutical industry in Ireland, because there is a lot and it will really impact the country. Also, Ireland is set to implement the EU Migration Pact next year, introducing measures to handle an expected annual intake of between 10,000 and 24,000 asylum seekers. The government has allocated 1.6 billion to build and maintain accommodation centres, but concerns remain over Ireland's readiness. Yeah, I mean, look, this is something we've been talking about here on MOTH, is like, how are these places being run? Who's getting the money, and are they accountable? And is there oversight? And who are the people going into these asylum centres and checking that the people who are living there are being looked after? We've heard stories of, landlords, owners of these hotels cutting off the water so that the residents have to buy water. We've heard, we had interviews. We spoke to Alaya here on MOTH News a couple of weeks ago. She told us about how they cut off her food, stopped her daughter going to school, stopped her daughter getting on the school bus because she wouldn't move rooms or something like that. So, it really needs to be carefully looked at where these people are being housed, how it's being run, and where the money's going. And, make sure that the money's going to people that aren't spending money that they borrowed from chicken farmers in America that they promised they would pay back, but they haven't yet. So yeah, it's interesting. And also they also need to balance that out. When they're making these announcements, they need to make sure that the local community in the area looked after with their own facilities, and that's kind of how you do it, guys. Politics, you kind of try to look after everybody. Makes the sort of the vacuum. Well, you could try and get rid of that kind of vacuum that the right like to fill in. And also, we will speak to our guest, Angie, who will be on with us in a moment. The government has given the green light to RTÉ's voluntary redundancy scheme as part of a broader restructuring plan for the national broadcast. I've never seen them do a restructuring thing before. This is totally new for them. It's like I don't know. It's like the Late Late Toy Show. It's perennial. It comes around every now and then. The restructuring of RTÉ, it never fixes the problem. This needs wholesale changes. But anyway, I don't think the staff have been told yet, but they will be looking for more redundancies, and we'll speak to Angela Mezzetti about that, former newsreader with RTÉ. And finally, a major row erupted in the Dáil this week over government changes to speaking time rules, with opposition TDs accusing the coalition of tilting debate in their favour. It seemed to be a bit of a stroke from what, from looking at it from the outside. It seemed a bit sharp practice. The controversy led to a motion of no confidence against the Ceann Comhairle, who seems to have been caught in the middle, Verona Murphy, who has denied any wrongdoing. I mean, look, we're not sure, was she in cahoots? Was she not in cahoots? You got to be very clear about these things. And I tell you, if the opposition government, if the opposition parties are saying it felt ugly and it felt uncomfortable, like, you've got to listen to them. I don't think, I just, the government really wanted this to work, and it seemed like a bit of a bit odd the way they went about it. And what's even odder, and this is something we like to talk about here in MOTH News, is the mainstream media's treatment of news like this. If we look at News Talk Breakfast and how they spoke about what happened in the Dáil, they're focusing not on this, like, Lowry giving the two fingers to democracy. They're focusing on the hubbub and brouhaha that happened afterwards, which was clearly the opposition getting very angry about the way this was being pushed through. But News Talk seemed to be more upset about the anger from the opposition than the two fingers to democracy. Let's just have a look at a little clip from News
The
Talk.
opposition have had their fun. There is a deliberate strategy, particularly from Sinn Féin, to drag politics down, to make it into street warfare and street politics. That's fine as a strategy, but we need the Dáil to do its job.
End of leaders' questions. That's the end of leaders' questions.
That is unprecedented by any yardstick.
A disgrace, an absolute disgrace. You're making a holy show of yourselves.
An embarrassment, really, wasn't it?
Is that the new collective noun for politicians? An embarrassment of politicians? Because, it was embarrassing, it was unedifying. And when I was watching it...
I don't have the stomach for that show anymore, because it's so dishonest. It's not authentic. It's not real. It's supposed to be a news station. And I've been on News Talk, and I'll be on it again. I probably won't. But it's disingenuous, and it's glaringly obvious what they're doing. It's like I suppose I'm trying to figure out what their game plan is. They've always been overtly, in my opinion, anti-Sinn Féin. They are always, it seems, overtly on the side of, I don't know, if you're to speak in marketing terms, ABC1, like people who have a bit more money. The people who vote, I suppose, the people who spend money on cars, might go on holidays, have a bit more disposable income. That's, if you look at News Talk and you wonder why they take certain, sides, or, it seems odd the way that seemed odd to me, that they were focused on the shouting after the terrible thing that the government did. Well, you might look at who they want to target as regards to a potential audience. So if I worked in radio for a long time, and you're always looking at your audience. So who are your audience? Who's listening? And who do you want to listen? For News Talk, they want people who have disposable income to be listening. So they're sort of doing news for those people. They're preaching to the choir. They're coming up with the content that those people will find comfortable. I don't think people like that would necessarily feel comfortable if they were to call out the government in this issue. And, would they be seen to side with Sinn Féin or any of the other opposition parties? But that, to me, is the only reason, and maybe I'm way off, but that's my opinion on what's happening here. And it just seems a bit off. Like, if you're a news, do news. Do you know what I mean? Tell people what's going on. Tell people what was wrong with what the government did. Like, to say it's embarrassing, and to be playing a clip of the Ceann Comhairle saying that they're a disgrace. The government are a disgrace. Like, to see Michael Lowry giving two fingers to a camera at the end, the smirking, the nodding, the winking, that's no way to behave. You pulled a fast one. You got one over on the opposition, but you also pulled a fast one on the people of Ireland. You also pulled a fast one on democracy. It's not smart. It's not clever. and you've only let yourselves down, lads. Let's have a look at the gentleman, the editor of the Sunday Business Post as well, possibly somebody who's looking to appeal to a certain demographic like News Talk as well. So let's see what he has to say
July
about
2020 down in the convention centre during COVID, when there was a row also about speaking rights, when the then Chief Whip Jack Chambers tried to change the rules, and there was about 2 hours of argy-bargy when Catherine Connolly was in the chair. Similar situation, the opposition en masse screaming and shouting and not letting the Crown Court get on with their business. It's the only similar, but not the same level of venom that we saw yesterday.
Because we've never seen anything in terms of the move that was made yesterday.
I cannot understand,
standing orders.
As an elected representative, you're sitting here defending what happened yesterday.
60
How can you defend what happened yesterday?
I'll defend whatever I choose to defend, Daniel. Thank you. That'll be my position, and you can have yours, which will be very different to mine, and that's fine. We'll now have a situation where you'll have 60 backbench TDs, and this wasn't about 60 backbench TDs. It was never about backbench TDs until the technical group issue went off the radar entirely. You'll have 64 now that are in government, support government, and are part of forming the government, who will have a slot next to the party leaders of opposition for leaders' questions, which is set up since the foundation of the state to hold the government to account, raising issues to government ministers that they put in their jobs. It is a mad situation, and it is unprecedented in the state.
The only
not like the old Sunday Business Post to play fast and loose with the truth. We have spoken about them before, and their support of a certain Jeff Leo, and never reporting anything bad about this guy who has invested money in iPass centres in Ireland, has taken money off the chicken farmers in America, has bought buildings in Ireland, has housed refugees in buildings in Ireland that aren't fit for humans to live in, and treated those people badly and created massive problems for towns like Dundrum in Tipperary, and of course, who gets blamed? Well, the poor old refugees once again get blamed, or the protesters, depends on which side you're on. But yeah, that's the Sunday Business Post there, just being the Sunday Business Post, I suppose. I do have joining me, our guest today is Angela Mezzetti. Angela is a former newsreader with RTÉ, and you might recognise her. If you're my vintage, if you're my age, you might recognize her. I mean, Angela,
going back a while.
I still think like the 90s aren't that long ago. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when people say things like, the 60s or, the 50s were as far away from the 80s as we are from the 90s, whatever, I just, I usually punch people in the face who say stuff like that.
Feels like a long time. You got through an awful lot there, Keith. So much to say about so much of it.
Yeah, I know. What did you think of my news reading style as an expert?
Excellent. Actually, that's another thing I'll come back to. Speech standards in RTÉ, which have just gone like crazy, particularly after midnight. I just shout at the radio so often, but I'll come back to that later. Just mispronunciations or piss pronunciations, whatever you want to call it. But just good. I just want to say,
are they not pronouncing roundabout anymore?
Oh, that drives me crazy. But just THs, basic things like three instead of tree.
Yeah.
I know we can explain about, and Saturday, and I know it's directly related to the Irish for Saharan and stuff. I get that, but just
so
anyway, I'm digressing. But Michael Lowry, one of the things that struck me the day the ministers came into the Dáil with all ceremony to walk down the steps to take their seats. And all of the regional independents made a point of going over and leaning over the banister and shaking hands with Michael Lowry. It was quite pronounced. It's like, thanks, boss. And I thought, this is not right, And I was just looking at some of the figures there.
At the time, Angela, they were referring to him as the kingmaker.
It looks like he was, but look, I just did a look at some of the figures. Verona Murphy, nominee, supposed to be independent, was his suggestion. She's a salary of 255,573, so she's going to hang on for dear life to that role. Super Juniors, of which there are two from the regional independents, they get 172,769 as a salary. And then the other ministers, 159,625. Okay, and yet Michael Lowry claims he's in the opposition. Okay,
it's an unbelievable stroke, isn't it?
It is. You'd nearly have a stroke thinking about it, wouldn't you? And just, I read a lovely piece a very clever piece today by Justine McCarthy in the Irish Times. It's an open letter to the people of Tipperary, basically saying, why did you foist this TD upon us yet again. Like, what are you thinking of? You know, do they do it for a laugh? And in it, she refers back to the Moriarty Tribunal. And she just reminded, like, talk about strokes. Just wanted to find, and Streamline Enterprises was his refrigeration company. He, according to the Moriarty Tribunal, so I'm not making this up, pocketed 34,500, so £34,500 of Dunnes stores designated to the workers in Larry's refrigeration company. He didn't pass that on to the workers, he kept it. That's according to the Moriarty Tribunal. So stroke politics, very much so. I'd love to know if they voted for him. That's what she asks as well. Did they vote for him?
But who did vote for him? And like,
and why?
And why? And like, is he really? Maybe he's really good in the area. Maybe he gets the roads done. Maybe he fills the potholes. Maybe there's a youth club down there. Maybe there's, like, you know, a Formula One training track down there or something that we don't know about. Maybe the hurlers get new boots every year. Like, what, you know, you have to wonder what's going on in North Tipperary. If anybody from North Tipperary is watching and would like to tell us why, or if they voted for him or why they didn't vote for him, we'd love to hear from you.
Well, Charlie Haughey used to get elected because before the election he would send a Tato van around RTÉ and Coolock, throwing out bags of crisps. Bags of crisps. They bought the election with bags of crisps.
That's how you get votes. And that man ended up with his own boat and an island and a castle and lots more money.
And Dunn stores involved there as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, they were good. I mean, Ben Dunn, when you look back, it wasn't the worst, really, was he?
No, he was actually all right. He was probably the best of them. But Michael Lowry's always been very blatant. I mean, even when the picture that came out afterwards of him just flipping the bird to the...
And the smirk. The smirk.
Yeah, was
and
that
then
worse
he says
than the
he's
two
waving? Yeah, it's bad. But you can't say that the smirk, or sorry, that the two fingers wasn't the two fingers. Of course, it was two fingers. If anybody looked at that video, of course, it's two fingers. But it's two fingers to the people of Ireland as well as the opposition. I mean, they're supposed to have speaking time.
What do you think of News Talk Breakfast take on it? I mean, like, I just found that really odd. You know,
so would I.
Am I backing up the wrong tree with the
demographic?
Because we have to know what news is. If we're getting news, but it's news from an angle because of something, then we have to be aware of that, don't we?
Yeah, you wouldn't find that in RTÉ, in fairness. In the newsroom, you'd be hauled over the coals for doing something like that. Absolutely, it's about equilibrium. And, you know, people would throw, I remember when I was in RTÉ, people saying, oh, all you people in RTÉ think the same. No, they don't. You'd have rows at the same desk, people coming from two divergent opinions, you know? And that's where everything needs to be like this, so that there's challenge. There always should be challenge, even within newsrooms. So somebody will challenge, because there's always a grey area. There's never anything as black and white. The truth is always somewhere in the middle.
So how does it work then? If you give us a bit of an insight into RTÉ and how it would work, are you pulling the bulletin together? Are you looking for, there's editorial? Do you have a meeting at the start of the day to go, we're going to cover this, we're going to cover this? So how does a little bit about that? Give us an insight.
Well, people get promoted to the role of editors because they're regarded as having good judgment, you know, and that's usually by common consensus. There's regular meetings over the week. I remember going into meetings on a Monday morning, and the first question would be, what did we miss over the weekend? Like, did we cover everything fairly? So the emphasis on fairness is front and center. Now, whether they always get it right, I don't know, but I think they do pretty much. So I would I believe that the clip that you showed there in News Talk was not typical of what, it was more opinion than actual news.
Yeah,
I would say. And it is talk, as they have in their head.
We need to be aware of that, don't we, as well, that it is News Talk. And they do have their votes then at the top and the bottom of the hour. So
we need a functioning opposition that can call the government to account. And that's the role of opposition, to be able to call ministers, to be able to call the Taoiseach, have speaking time, and giving it to people on their own side and saying, well, we're really the opposition. It's farcical. So I totally understand them getting up in arms. I mean, there's a lot of jobs being waited to line up to be given out as heads of, to be on, you know, the head of the particular Dáil committee. Doesn't always go to the government. You know, Public Accounts Committee, you know, they all command extra salaries. So, you know, if the opposition were doing this for the money, they're waiting to be allocated these roles and jobs. So it's in their interest to get this sorted out soon. But, you know, you can understand them having principles. We need politicians to have principles, and you don't think of that when you think about Michael Lowry, do you?
But is this the stroke that was pulled, like, as in, are they setting themselves up like with the super juniors and the junior ministers? Is that like just bolstering the party because they kind of had to sort of pull pull it together with independence and like, is that like?
No, this would be part of this is the price for their support of the government, would be that they get that they would get roles.
The voice.
It was just some of them. You see that the regions are often elected, so it's, you know, you can see the reason for having people from the regions. I think Marion Harkin is one of them, Healy Ray, Kevin Boxer Moore, and they're all part of those. They've got those roles, and you know, they could be very good. I'm not saying they're good, bad, or indifferent, but that was their price of being in government. So they're in government, so they can't be in the opposition.
The problem is people didn't vote for, when they voted for these people, they didn't vote for Fine Gael, they didn't vote for Fianna Fáil, they voted for them because they were independent. So, I mean, is that kind of like, is that sort of two fingers up to their voters as well?
Not really. I mean, people voted the way they did, and the people are usually very clever. It was kind of like steady as you go, but you got to do something on housing and you got to do something on care. The whole care referendum taught us that they have to do something on care, carers, people with disabilities. You listen to any of the programs on radio. Well, I only listen to RTÉ radio. My husband listens to News Talk, so I go between rooms and I hear bits of both. But, you know, people with children with disabilities, with elderly relatives with disabilities, they're exhausted fighting the system, you know, and the people who were voted for the government to do something about this, you know, so that's huge on people's agenda. That's why they didn't give the government a huge majority. Yes, we want the economy to do well. Yes, we want steady as she goes, and you know, we are the envy of Europe because of our economic growth. So we're getting some things right, but there's an awful lot we're getting wrong too, and we're heading into turbulent times. So I don't know why people voted, but I imagine that's part of it. So I don't think it's a two fingers. No.
When do you think the government will actually get time to do the job of the government? Now, like, do you think this thing will wrap up soon? This fighting over how many minutes they have to speak in the Dáil and all that kind of stuff? Because I'm not sure they've actually done any work yet.
Well, the ministers will be in their jobs doing their daily work and getting up to speed on their briefs. Yeah, because a lot of the civil servants do all the preparatory work and the research, and that's always ongoing. So then it's up to the ministers and junior ministers, you know, and cabinet members to make decisions then, and to call things and then publicize them, of course, to get the credit for doing it.
Yeah, I suppose I have a sort of a, we talk about it a lot, is like, you know, circus, bread and circuses, you know, for the people. And you wonder, you know, when you're looking at stuff like this, you're going, what's actually going on then? If they are working and they are getting stuff done, you know, are carers being neglected? Are they actually going about, you know, sorting out, you know, TUSLA, or, you know, are they doing the work that they need to be doing? And is this just like a distraction for people? So this is taking up the headlines, really. This is what you know, as a newsreader in RTÉ, this is what you'd be dealing with mostly. So it's like, it's creating this, you know, circus, so that so people don't have, there's no space on the front pages for the sort of the terrible things that are going on in the country.
I think it's about setting up the process for the next 4 or 5 years. Like, if they don't get this sorted now, it doesn't bode well for the future. So the way that the Oireachtas runs, the way that the Dáil and the Seanad run from now on, will be dictated by the way ministers are held to account. So it's important to get that right now. I think Verona Murphy thinks, well, she's put down the hammer and it's all sorted now, but I can't see it settling that quickly. I can't see it. I can't see the opposition, particularly Sinn Féin, settling for it just yet. And the Labour Party, and they're working well together in opposition, which is a good sign to see, you know.
They're thick as thieves.
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely brought them together, and you've never seen a sort of a more united opposition. Really.
Yeah. And they have to be there to champion their own. I mean, they have a huge mandate as well. Sinn Féin, you know, whatever your politics are, you have to respect they have a mandate, and they have a mandate primarily from working class people.
Yeah.
Do you know?
And they are the people that are being ignored, and that's, I mean, that's my issue. Then when you turn on something like News Talk Breakfast and they're talking in this way, you're going, well, hang on a second, what about the working class? But you have to remember that they're not broadcasting to the working class. They're broadcasting to, you know, ABC One's people with disposable income who buy cars and go on holidays. So it's worth bearing that in mind as well when you're listening to news.
I have to tell you something. I have a relative anyway who's now in long-term care, but I had to go through my family home and, you know, go through all the stuff that was there since the house was first built. And I grew up in Marino, in a working class area of Dublin. The house was tenant purchase house. So every whatever Tuesday or Wednesday, you went down and you paid money in the rent office. So going through the old papers, I found this receipt or this guide to housing in Reno, which was from 1952, and it's called the Housing of the Working Classes Act. So no shame in that. The working classes need to be housed. They can't afford to be built on houses. So it wasn't waiting on developers to come and do it. The government did it. The government, and it was done through the corporation, if you're from Dublin, Housing Allocations Branch, Lord Edward Street. And there's a receipt for 50 quid.
And that was back in the day we had governments that we used to call right wing.
1952. 1952,
Yeah.
you know, and they moved from a house. I mean, my brother, who's now in his 80s, said he lives in America and he's done very well for himself over the years. But he said when they moved into the house from where they were on the quay, on the canal in Chicor, they had no running water inside the house. They had no toilet or anything like that. And he said when they moved into the house in Marino, which is a terraced house, 3-bedroom, small kitchen, small little house, but the business, as far as they were concerned, he ran up the stairs and got into the bath in his foot clothes and turned on just to have a bath, you know, just have access to a bath. So that's how far we've come, you know. But I mean, the government built houses didn't always get it right, but they built Marino in 1925, Garden City, you know, for working class people. Still fabulous houses built around, you know, a template of greens and, you know, little gardens so you could grow a few veg for yourself if you wanted. They're still great houses, still well served, you know, to the community, still working. Community, the Scouts Hall was in the middle of it, the rent office in the middle of it, near the church, near the schools, the whole biz, you know. So, I mean, the government could do it before, so why can't they do it now?
Yeah.
Like, empower the county council. Now, somebody probably, you know, get in touch with us and say, oh, they are there, but not on the scale that needs to be done.
No, they're not doing enough. I mean, we even lied about, you know, 30,000, which was actually 20,000. So I mean, like, we know that they haven't done enough. And why? We have to ask the question: why aren't they looking at, like, not all working class people are you know, go into an office and sit in beanbags and play with pinball machines, you know, and have, you know, free beers on Friday. That's not the working class. I mean, the Gardaí and the nurses and, like, these are a working class now, and they can't even afford to buy homes. And I know, like, I know, you know, I have friends of mine who are guards who are, like, getting 2 trains, you know, just so they can afford to save up for a mortgage, and they're wrecked by the time they go to do the job. And then we wonder why the Gardaí aren't able to do their job and they're not being given the support. And, you know, that's the thing. These are the things that are being kept off the headlines by the circumstances that are going on in the Dáil, as far as I'm concerned. I'm going to bring in Philip, because he's sitting there and I know he's itching, because I'd say he's a big fan of Marino. Phil, I know you're a fan of Marino and Angie, so have you?
Not only am I a fan of Angie and Marino being mentioned in the one show was almost too much for me here, Keith. I grew up the road in Donecarney, but of course I went to school there on Griffith Avenue, and the last place I lived in Ireland actually was on Phillipsburg Avenue, there, just the edge of Marino, if you like, or, you know, towards the newer places. So I know it well.
You had the cottle and the old triangle and all.
This is there you go. Look at that. Isn't that amazing? The funny thing about that area, Keith, was that almost exactly the same story as Angie there, right? So my father grew up in Inchicore, and when his family moved, they moved to Donecarney, which was just a little bit further north of Marino. But an awful lot of people there were Dublin people, but there was also an awful lot of country people as well, working class people who'd come up. And because my grandparents, none of them were from Dublin, that I was saved the horrors of coddle as I was growing up, kind of thing. Not that I still appreciate it to this day, you know, as a cultural thing, not as something you would eat. You could have put it under a Christmas tree and let it go rotten there, you know. But the point Andrew was making there is a fascinating one, because I went back. I was asked to speak to the Social Democrats in Ireland a few years ago, and I told them about something. I don't know if I told you this before, Keith. There was something in Sweden called the Million Programme, which took place over 10 years, and the state here built 1 million homes, 1,006,000 to be exact, in 10 years, right? 100,000 a year, and they smacked them up. Was it all brilliant? No, but there were the Marinos in there. There were some fantastic places built in there, and again, it was built by the state. It was built by the government, and again, in the same way as Ireland is in a similar situation now, it was all gradually sold off. And there are places to this day that are still owned in that sort of collective manner, but for the most part, they were sold off. And again, now Sweden isn't looking down the barrel of a similar housing crisis to Ireland, but Give it a few years, give it a decade. If you're not building social housing, you're going to end up in that situation. And what they actually modeled part of it on was places like Marino, when they were building. It's actually, you mentioned the Garden City there, Angie. 2 stops from me on the underground now as I'm going home is exactly one of those garden cities where they try to recreate not the architecture or the exact town planning, but the same vibe as Marino. And the first time I walked through it, it was amazing. It was like being in Dublin 3 all over again.
Yeah, it was a great place to grow up. Now, the Garden City part was built in the 20s and 30s, and they were always called the Jerry built houses. I never understood why, but I think it was a German design. But you're right, it is regarded as a template, and it's studied by town planners all over the place.
And even before that,
build our houses.
Yeah, but even before that, where are you going to put them? Even before that, when social housing became a thing, like one of the things that happened under the rule of the British Empire in Ireland, if we're going to get the history books out here, was they tested loads of stuff that they, you know, if it worked, they brought it back to the mainland as they would have had it. And a great example of that is what happened at Mountjoy Prison. If you read the history of Mountjoy Prison, everything they did there in terms of putting people in solitary confinement, the death penalty for everything was tried out in Mountjoy first. So the Irish were very much the guinea pigs of the great ideas of the British Empire. But social housing was also one of those things that they tested first in Ireland, and they saw, okay, this works, that doesn't. And then they brought it back across the water to places like Liverpool and Manchester and Sheffield and parts of London and that. So, you know, there's a lot to be said for it. And the funny thing is that certain things don't change. You know, the way the laws of physics don't change over time. They are that way kind of thing. And housing, as we heard from our guest a few weeks ago, we had an academic that we interviewed about housing, and the dynamics are the same all over the world. So either private developers build it, you build it on your lonesome, or the state builds it. There's not really that many options out there. And in Ireland, we're kind of starting to run out seeing as the state isn't doing that.
Just one thing, can I just a quick point? One thing that we tried in Ireland by copying the UK was building tower blocks, and that was a disaster because that's what happened in the 70s with Ballymun. And those tower blocks were just put out there. People are left in isolation, no shops, no schools. They were lovely because a brother of mine actually moved into one of the smaller blocks, 4-story ones when it moved in, and they were beautiful, high finish, built by the corporation again, but just no thought into the wider community and how it was going to be linked to the buses. And
yeah, I mean that's we have. Yeah. It's not enough just to throw the houses up. Before we let you go, Angie and Phil, you might have something to say on this as well. I see RTÉ have announced that the government are giving the go ahead to make some redundancies. Myself and yourself might have something to say about that, and maybe they might pay us the money they owe us first. But
that's for employees. But do they have any employees left? Because most people, I mean, how do you define what's an employee in RTÉ? It's a very movable feast, a very fickle,
very comfortable looking men going around, seem very assured about their future. They're the employees, the guys with the pensions. They're the ones. So I don't know who's going to pension. I don't know who, but they've announced that the government have said, yeah, you're allowed to make people to announce redundancies. They do it every few years. It's just a sort of it's time to do the redundancy thing again. Nothing ever changes. I mean, what are your thoughts?
I thought you were being facetious at the beginning there, saying that was new. Yeah. I mean, every now and again, you know, people are made redundant. I was made redundant, even though I wasn't an employee. Worked that one out. You know.
So tell us a little bit about your situation. So you were like, I mean, you were a familiar face on the news. You were like, you weren't just a news reader doing, you know, covering the radio on the Sunday morning.
I had been 6 main news bulletins, but I mean, I had been a continuity announcer. I'd gone through all the employment process that you're supposed to become an employee. I was whittled down from 2000 to 20, given a 6-week training course. Then that was whittled down to 5 or 6 people. So you do continuity announcing and radio. Then I moved over to TV, did that for a few years. And then I thought, you know, I'd really like to get into the newsroom. And I got in after a series of very strenuous interviews, and I did the job for 6 years, and they kept saying, no, you're not an employee yet, you'll have to compete. And I said, I already did, I'm on the panel. So they just kept making you go through hoops because it suited them to have me, that I could work the weekend, they could move me around, whereas everybody else was, you know. So and eventually I just thought, no, I can't take this anymore. And it's funny because my father had worked in RTÉ, had been in there since the beginning. He was a set painter and had worked in Ardmore before that. So he was the old school craftsman. He could paint, gild, sculpt things, you know, Italian tradition, painting, decorate, all that kind of thing. So you know, I wonder, is it just karma that he worked there maybe 12 years and was 25 years on the pension? So we're going not letting another Mezzetti in there, you know.
Taking enough from us.
But then actually when I went to leave, I remember one of the bosses came to, I said, I didn't know your father worked here. And my father had died. Sorry, that was the relevance of this. My father had died in September, and I left RTÉ in October because I thought, can't take this anymore. It was a very emotional time for me, you know, saying goodbye to a dad and all that, you know.
Yeah.
So it was like the severing of that link in RTÉ, and, you know.
It's probably it'd be news to people that a familiar face who was delivering the news at 6 o'clock and 9 o'clock, you know, because every dad in Ireland said the news is on now, everything stops.
Yes.
You know, turn off Ray Darcy or whatever the hell, you know, turn off Ian, this is on now. And you were a very familiar face, but behind the scenes, you were an ambassador. You were like the face of the brand. Like you were one of the main.
And the voice as well. And I have been for years. Like, you know, kids still say to me, do your RTÉ voice. And you're like, RTÉ radio ahem, tá sé bhí bheithint RTÉ radio or television bailach ahem. You know, so you get but you know, you just get your RTÉ voice as such, you know, and trained to the nth degree. That's sorry to circle back to the pronunciation stuff. But like if you mispronounced a word, or if you said Manny or Annie instead of any and many, I used to get a note about those. Annie is a girl's name, it's any. But you really can say anything you like now. I'm all in favour of regional voices and Dublin voices. I love hearing Joe on the radio, Joe Duffy. It's great that we do have normal people on the radio and TV now.
There's nothing normal with Joe Duffy. Hang on a sec there.
There is, you know. Go on. Really? Yeah.
Well, maybe in RTÉ's loss, maybe we might avail of your services. And God knows myself and Philip need whipping into shape when it comes to pronouncing our.
Exactly. We need more non-bearded individuals with great journalistic training are always needed here on MOTH News. And just one point on that, Angie and Keith, is after the Eversheds review, as far as I know, an awful lot of people who would have been in a similar situation to you, Angie, were actually regularized. So RTÉ kind of had no choice but to actually sort of regulate their employment status and say, either you go now or we give you a contract, because, you know, they kind of had to sweep everything under the carpet. And that's why they find themselves now in a position where they actually have to make redundancies, because previously, I mean, I've been a freelance journalist for donkey's years, and basically what that means is you can be fired whenever, you know, and it's the same even with people I've worked with for 15, 20 years. I know that, you know, come the end of the year, October, November is always a dodgy time when people are setting budgets and you go, okay, am I going to be working for this particular organization for another year, you know? And what happens is we're in the firing line. We provide all the flexibility, as Angie was saying, reading the news at the weekend, continuity announcing, you present it on breakfast radio under the same terms. And yet when it comes down to it, you're just the easiest person to shove out the door. So they do actually have a need.
They do, but where it was different for myself and Keith and a lot of people is that I only worked for RTÉ. Like if you're a freelance journalist and you might do a day here or a gig there, you know, and you send an invoice, and if you can't do it, you might sub somebody else. But I was RTÉ to the viewer and the listener.
Yeah.
Keith was RTÉ.
You weren't allowed to work for anybody else.
They wouldn't allow you work for anybody else, and they would write it into your contract.
Yeah, I mean, then it's a similar thing actually in that organization that Conor McGregor fights in, the UFC. They call the fighters independent contractors, right? Try go fighting for somebody else. Try go and taking a boxing match. You know, I think they took 40% of McGregor's purse when he fought against Floyd Mayweather in a boxing match in 2017 or 2018. You know, so that idea, and this is what Martin McMahon, Keith's friend, calls bogus self-employment. You're self-employed to the point where we'll get rid of you whenever we want. But we own you. Until then, we own you. And in fairness, you know, it's one of those things that, you know, I'm not owed anything by RTÉ. They never paid me enough to be liable for anything. But people like yourselves who worked there full time for a long time, and as you say, Angie, you were the face and the voice of things there for a long time. You have to be paid what you're owed.
But you know, Martin has been a great champion for people. But one of the people he's championed, Joe, I mean, he went and did an interview. Joe Kelly went for the job on day one. Instead of handing him the form for registration, they said, this is how you go. This is where you go and register as self-employed. Like
same for me. Yeah,
a job that he couldn't do anywhere else. It was specifically a job in RTÉ that they trained him for.
Yeah,
you know,
absolute madness. And surely we'll have our day, won't we, Angie?
Dáil, yeah.
Keep
Yeah.
working, keep working. Andy, thanks very much for joining us, and really appreciate it. We will be talking again soon. Hopefully, you'll become a familiar face on MOTH News.
That'll be fun.
See you, Angie. Enjoy your weekend. Good luck, good luck, good luck, good luck, good luck. An absolute legend. And the thing that struck me, whatever about my own situation with RTÉ, the thing that struck me is there are other names like Angela Mezzetti reading the news, ambassador for RTÉ, face of RTÉ. There's bigger names, people you'd know, names you recognise, that have been left high and dry by RTÉ, living in poverty in their old age. And I've spoken to these people. They're old school, so they don't want to make a fuss, or they don't want to be like seen to be given out or looking for something. But I mean, it's a disgrace the way some of these people have been treated. Like, give so much of themselves, because if you're in RTÉ and you can't work for anybody else, you give so much of yourself.
I was absolutely shocked, Keith. The first time when we were getting involved in this particular project that is MOTH News, and somebody says, Keith Walsh, I was going, that was their name, man on the radio there a while ago. And it was you. And I was going, oh, okay, how did this happen? And then in the same way, I didn't realize what had happened to Angie, and it's only in recent times when you made contact with her again that I realized what that was. But again, I think like for viewers and listeners who are watching this today, you would be shocked at the people. Now, obviously, we've seen things around Ryan Tubridy and late show presenters, and we know that they're sort of self-employed or bogus self-employed, as Martin McMahon would have it, but they're earning a whole heap of money. The people you would think about are people who are on programs every single day or every single weekend, and you think of them in the same ways you would think of Angie as being a voice and a face of RTÉ, but in fact, they're sending an invoice every month, and they don't know what they're going to be doing in 2 months' time, nor can they, as Angie said, go off and work for somebody else. And that really is, the sort of, when 2FM started, I think it was in the late 70s, early 80s there, that's the sort of the generation that is now going into retirement. And a lot of those men and women who worked in that time were in that position where, they were trying out something, or they went from contract to contract and that. And as young people involved in broadcasting, and I'm sure we were those young people once, Keith, you don't think about pensions, and you don't think about having to pay rent when you're 65 or 66 or 67. But by the time that birthday comes around, that's a problem that you've got to solve, whether you've thought about it or not. And that's the situation, because bogus self-employment is not just to do with, the sort of the uncertainty that you're working at the time. It's also what happens after you leave. And that's the really big issue for an awful lot of people who've worked there.
Has Al joined us? Is Al there? Is there?
I think we were going to go on for another little while before Al was going to join at the top of the hour, wasn't he?
So listen, let's talk about. So we spoke a little bit about. Actually, I'd like your take on the Dáil situation and what you think happened there. I spoke to Angie about it. Looked like a bit of a stroke. What are your thoughts?
I think the big thing here is this is absolutely crucial to the way the next 4 or 5 years in the Dáil is going to work, right? So you have a situation where Michael Lowry went off after the election. The cards fell as they did, and there were various constellations, most of which were never going to even be tried, between Sinn Féin and Fine Gael and Labour or whatever else, And this was the way it looked like going. And the independent TDs who were going to hold the balance of power, they were the ones who decided, okay, we're going to let Michael Lowry speak for us. And somewhere in the grubby rooms off the corridors of power, Michael Lowry struck a deal with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and we haven't been allowed to see that. And in that deal somewhere, we have a clause that says, okay, this TD in this area, your area is going to get this, and you personally are going to get this junior ministry, or you're going to get this trip for St. Patrick's Day to Melbourne, or you're going to get, the lane outside your house is never going to have a pothole again. But also, and I would, dimes to donuts, I would bet that there is this thing about speaking rights in there, that just because you're supporting the government, because it's very important, if you're a local TD, you'll see them all on their social media. Every time they address the Dáil, even if they look like a twit, they will put that up on their social media, and that's for their voters. That's saying, here I am, I'm speaking for you in the Dáil, I'm doing this work, here's the thing I spoke about, be it housing or health or whatever it is, the question that appeals to their heart is, right? So they need that. But if they're going to do that, and they're independent TDs, and you have a line of 50 or 60 Fianna Fáil TDs, and you have a line of 20 or 30 Fine Gael TDs, you're at the back of that line. And there's no guarantee that you're going to get that speaking time, because you're sharing it with the government. And of course, as much as you want to speak to your constituents, they want to speak to theirs. And I'm sorry, but when, you come from the big team, then you get to sort of the first election for the big matches, So I think it's absolutely key now that the opposition doesn't give any of its time, not a single minute, not a single second. Let Micheál Martin and let Simon Harris work this out. They are the ones who did the deal with Michael Lowry, Not Ivana Bacik, not Mary Lou MacDonald, not Paul Murphy or Richard Boyd Barrett or anybody else on the other side of the house. But if they have to bend their back to this, because the other thing is, Verona Murphy as the Count Corla is a disgrace, right? Not only is the woman just completely unsuited to the job, she had one term in the Dáil, right? I don't even know if she knows where to hang her coat if she learned that much in that time. And now she's going to sit there and she's going to dictate the entire proceedings and how they go. She got confused the other day and called for I think she ended up calling for a vote when she meant to call for a vote on something else. She called for a vote on an opposition proposal rather than a government proposal, which she was supposed to do. And you just can't have that. The job of Count Corla, you have to be seen to be neutral, because they're never neutral. They always come from somebody's back pocket. But you have to be seen to be neutral, and you have to be seen to be fair. Now, I can't think of a single person in Ireland who isn't a member of Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael's front bench that thinks that Verona Murphy is impartial or in any way fair. She can't be, because she's no idea what she's doing. And again, no more than some of the people we were talking about in the media there, how do you get the media to report the stories you want to? You don't have to tell them, Keith. You just get people in who think like you. And that's what Verona Murphy's purpose is there. It's just you sit up there and you just nod away like the puppy in the back of the Passat, and you do your thing, and then we'll come and get you, kind of thing. Because asking her to make any sort of a decision, I mean, in the past when she's been asked about things, oh yeah, I got legal advice on something, and Paul Murphy has asked her, can we see the legal advice? No. So what's the point of a person like that? I mean, how can anybody in the country, let alone in the Dáil or the Oireachtas at all, have any sort of confidence in a person like that? And it's kind of sad in a way, because to me, it's the last sting of a dying wasp, right? We all know that Micheál Martin and Fianna Fáil and Simon Harris and Fine Gael will do absolutely anything to hold on to power, right? And as yet, their power has been diminishing. Their voter base has been diminishing for years. And eventually it will disappear to the point where they won't be able to get the majority that they need in Dáil Éireann. But until then, they will hang on, and they will lose fingernails hanging on to the coalface of power for as long as they can, because that's where they believe that they are supposed to be, right? They don't believe for a single second that no matter how many votes Sinn Féin gets, or the Labour Party gets, or the Greens or the Social Democrats, that they have any right to exert power in Ireland at all. Because for over 100 years, that has been essentially their birthright. Micheál Martin was at one point on the verge of becoming the first Fianna Fáil leader never to become Taoiseach. And since then, he has done so, but he's done so with almost a minority if you compare to previous Fianna Fáil Taoiseach like Charles Haughey and that. So I think this is a very important political time. What it is going to lead to is this sort of faction fighting now. We've heard it said by many political commentators that for the first time, you actually have a government and an opposition, So when you had Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael over the last few years, one of them was allegedly in opposition. How can they be in opposition when they believe in exactly the same solutions to the same problems? But now we have that. And the hard part, as always, the left in Ireland is kind of like the GEA, right? As soon as something forms, it has to be split immediately, because that split is what gives you your reason for existing. So it's going to be very difficult to have that sort of solidarity that everybody on the left actually says they believe in, but very few do when it comes down to voting. If they can manage to hold that together for any length of time whatsoever, they could actually create a very powerful opposition bloc. And that's what was lacking in the last election was, okay, if not these guys, who? Sinn Féin weren't able to put forward a case. They weren't able to say, they were kind of hurling off the ditch and said, okay, well, we could go with Fianna Fáil or we could go with the Social Democrats and the Green Party. Social Democrats got loads of seats. We kind of knew all along that they weren't really going to get into bed with Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael. But by that stage, the electorate was offered two alternatives, like something you don't know or more of the same. And they went, well, I'm not buying the pig in the poke, so we'll just take more of the same and see how that works out, So I do think that these are absolutely... Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I do think that these are vital weeks now, both for the opposition, but also for the government parties, because again, to go back to, what was being said, it is shameful to see so many weeks. The election was in November and there's still no committees. Shit is still going to the dogs in Ireland and nothing is happening about it because these idiots can't get themselves together. And I don't blame the opposition. They go on about, there's this tone policing that goes on, oh, they're misbehaving and they're shouting at a woman. And nobody's shouting at Verona Murphy because she's a woman. They're shouting at her because she's incompetent. And the idea that
you're the misogynist now because you said a woman is bad at her job.
Well, this is the thing. It's all about nuance. The same fellas who for years presided over, women being forced to stay in the home, the same women who the same people who legislated for women having to give up civil service jobs, or the same parties, should I say, that said that women had to give up civil service jobs as soon as they got married, that kind of, and they're going to accuse other people. Sit down, lads. Sit down and take a look around you.
And then people that came out and said the mother and baby homes was all our fault. We were all complicit.
Yeah, exactly. And in the last Dáil, what were they trying to do? They were trying to restrict the access of people to compensation for that. It doesn't hold up. And I think We often talk in Ireland about, when people go to the ballot box and they say, sure, they're all the same anyway. And this is what feeds into that. How can you have confidence in a political process or a democracy when the people that we elect are behaving like this? And by that, I mean the people with the actual power, not the people sitting in opposition who are having things taken away from them, but the idiots on the other side of the chamber who just don't see any problem in this, And it's kind of what you miss from, a Scandinavian or a Canadian politics, where there's a right thing to do. Okay, now we can argue about how to do it, but there's always a right thing to do in this case, right? And taking speaking time from the opposition to give it to people whose votes are propping up the government is not the right thing to do, morally, ethically, or politically, right? Kill it with fire, and let's get our committees running, and let's start to do the right thing for the country.
Phil, if Scandinavia is so great, why don't you just go and move there?
Do you know what? I just might. Stay here.
Well, look, if it's so unimaginable and so hard to for Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael politicians to ever see a day where they're in government, well, it would have been very hard not that long ago to see a Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael government. So anything is possible. So lads, keep your minds open. Hopefully someday we'll see a government without either Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael.
Just a competent one with any party in it.
Any party. We don't need parties. Actually, I'll leave it at this, but it appears that the shenanigans of the current government are creating a place and a space and a situation where we can look at the opposition and go, oh my God, there's an alternative, which is basically what you're saying. So they're shooting themselves in the foot, thinking they're the smart guy, flipping the bird, nodding a wink, and actually what they're doing is people are noticing the opposition and what they're saying, and it's sort of brought them together as well. So great work, guys. We might actually get some houses built. So there's a podcast that will be put out this evening. You spoke to a friend of MOTH, Ty Kiki. Will that video play there? I made it, so it might not. You know what I'm like with the
roll it there, Claire.
We'll see if it'll play. No, it's not there. So you spoke to Ty Kiki. Ty Kiki went to a funeral of a member of Hezbollah. You can sort of get into the details more than I can. I did have that clip to explain all the details. So he went to the funeral. Like as I said at the start, like we're not here as a platform to side with good versus evil, who's right, who's wrong, Hezbollah, Hamas, Israel. As I said before, I'm mostly against killing people, and I think at the moment Israel are leading the killing charge. But anyway, so he's outspoken. He's very much on the side of Palestine, and he was invited to go to a funeral in Lebanon. And when he came back, there was 2 hit pieces done on him, as he describes them. Kind of just went for him, and why he went and all that kind of stuff. Just explain a little bit about Ty, a comedian actually, but an activist as well.
Yeah, so Ty is somebody that I've known for several years now, and he was one of those guys who sort of, shot to fame.
Can I just say as well, the reason we're speaking about this is because we talk a lot about journalism, we talk a lot about the news, we talk a lot about why things are where they are, and this is of interest to me, not because I'm going, oh sure, like I'm a supporter of Hezbollah, or I'm like Ty Kiki supporter. It's interesting what happened to him. Sorry.
Exactly. Yeah. So Ty would have been somebody who became famous on, through Instagram reels and clips on Facebook and that kind of thing. So he does these videos where he plays, in many cases, all the characters by just sort of dressing up a little bit differently in that. And he will play the part of nation states. And in the beginning, they were often to do with Ireland and Northern Ireland and Great Britain and American colonialism, this kind of thing. And they were very, very funny in that. And, he sort of built himself a huge audience in that. He's written a book called The Portrait of a Piss Artist as a Young Man, about his own struggle with alcohol and drugs early in his career. He's a writer. He's put on plays. He's done all sorts of things.
It's a great play as well. I want to see it. It's very good.
Did you? Yeah, I haven't actually seen it myself now, much to my regret, But a fantastically talented guy in that. But that all changed on October 7th when Hamas basically made an attack on Israel and killed the guts of 1,600 to 2,000 people. The numbers differ a little bit. And because Tig is a very sort of pro-Palestinian, very much in favor of the Palestinian cause, very much anti-colonialist, he started to put out content when Israel responded with the incredible violence that has happened since then, really, and invasions and incursions into Gaza and bombings of hospitals hospitals and that kind of thing. Tighe's output sort of pivoted entirely almost towards that situation, right? And what happened, and again, you know, his politics aside, right? What happened after that was very, very interesting, because we've spoken recently about Garen Noon on this podcast, and Garen had some things to say about immigration in Ireland. And whereas Garen deleted or took away his own accounts over last weekend, I think it was, Tighe didn't have that luxury. He was shut down on Instagram. He was shut down on TikTok. He was restricted on YouTube, and the phone stopped ringing. Right. So any commercial work or voiceover work or anything that the chap would have had, and he was doing pretty well off that because he was such a big internet celebrity, was completely gone. Because if you express support in any way for the Palestinian people and you have a profile in the way the Tighe has, you're gone. You're finished. That's just not a narrative that the tech companies want. It's not a narrative that the media companies want. It's not a narrative that many people want. Now, you could argue that an awful lot of Irish people who sympathize with the Palestinian cause, I miss me TH there, Jesus Angie will kill me for that. You might think that, you know, that there would be a market there for that, but certainly in the broader world, there isn't. So since then, he's appeared on Al Jazeera quite a lot because he does provide a sort of a Western white voice. There's absolutely no denying the fact that, you know, he's a white Westerner, contributes to their interest in him. But he has interesting things to say about it. So he went to the funeral of Hassan Nasrallah, who was a leader of Hezbollah, and he would be one of these people who would be sort of, you know, almost fated as one of the great sort of, you know, Islamic revolutionaries and that kind of thing. Now, as you mentioned, we're not here to take a position for or against Hamas or Hezbollah or anything else like that. I have huge problems with Hezbollah. I've huge problems with Iran because, as I mentioned in the podcast, and you'll hear it when it comes out a little bit later on, friends of mine have been imprisoned in Iran. Neighbors of mine have been imprisoned in Iran, and they've been tortured there. I have huge issues with Tighe going there at all. But he stands up to that criticism in the podcast and tells me why he went there and why he felt that it wasn't right to bring up those things when he was there advocating for the Palestinian people. Do I like it? No. Do I accept it? Not really, but that's the way these things work. If we want to talk about having platforms where you can discuss ideas and you can discuss the rights and the wrongs and the ins and outs of things, we're asked for nuance the whole time. We're asked to embrace complexity. That's what we're doing with that conversation, and it's something that Tighe does. But when he came back, and this is the insidious part of it, or the weird part of it, is that certain people get painted. They get tarred with a certain brush if you go out and bat for a particular cause, in this case, the Palestinians, right? There's a nice, quiet way you can do it. You can put up a picture of a watermelon and you don't have to put any text up there whatsoever, and everybody go, oh, that's grand, that's about the level it's at, right? But if you start to speak about what's happening on the ground there, or if you start to share GoFundMe pages for Palestinian people in Gaza or whatever, that's a step too far for most people, you know? So we got him on and we had a good long conversation about himself and his career. But yeah, as I said, the insidious part of it was the two pieces that were written. One was in the Irish Times by a good friend of mine, Sally Hayden, and a journalist I respect enormously, and the other one was in the Irish Independent, where basically columnists are just having a go. Now, Sally's piece was news focused, saying that Tighe, this person was at this, and she wanted to get to the bottom of who funded that trip. Now, as far as I know, Tighe funded it himself, but it was very important to Irish media to find out who funded it, because it's kind of very easy to write somebody off if you say, okay, well, this person was paid to be there by Hezbollah, or paid to be there by Hamas, or paid to be there by this aid organization.
Therefore, he's a terrorist, or he's there.
Yeah, no, therefore he's bought and can't be trusted. So you're not necessarily, I mean, there's plenty of people would call him a terrorist and a terrorist sympathizer and an anti-Semite and all these things, right?
As he says, one of those terroristy people. It was very funny.
Yeah, exactly. Just a little bit involved in terrorism. You know? A whiff of terrorism off that joke fly, you know? And that's how you sort of, you know, you can sort of take away somebody's credibility by saying, well, of course they would say that they're paid to be here, kind of thing, you know. With Tighe, I mean, I find the interesting thing about that is that if you knew how much money the chap had lost through taking this stance, the idea that this is something of a grift or whatever is just absolutely hilarious. Because as he mentioned in the interview, he did these voiceovers for, you know, products and that, for things like that. Loads of people. The great Joe Rooney, who played Father Damo in Father Ted. Joe does voiceover work. The great Tara Flynn, a great Cork woman, fantastic activist for many causes as well. But she famously did, was it the Cadbury's Caramel Bunny was the one that followed her around for years. She did the voice for the TV ad there, and it was the sexiest thing that most people had heard. And it's sort of followed her around.
Questioning their sexuality because they were like, what?
God, they were questioning all sorts of things. Just because of a bunny on a TV ad kind of thing. Yeah, but all of that worked right up for Tighe. And now we're in that situation where if we look back to Garen Noon last weekend and as I say, I'm delighted to see Garen back on TikTok and Instagram and that kind of thing. I don't think he's changed his mind about anything that he said. But, you know, like if he's allowed to sort of rehabilitate himself in a 9-minute video and come back and start taking those lovely influencer dollars again, then what's the problem with Tighe? Because I've never had Taig say that he wants to see, Israelis bombed or anything else like that. I've never heard any sense of anti-Semitism out of the chap at all. Now, I have heard him be unbelievably angry about what's going on in Palestine, but I've never heard him express anything that was expressly anti-Semitic, So that's where it begins and ends for me, the discussions. I want to know why certain people are okay to say certain things and somebody like Taig is absolutely not allowed to do so. So you can listen to the interview yourself. It will be on the Unvetted podcast on MOTH News a little bit later on this evening. And thanks to Keith, who did a brilliant job editing it. So.
I know you did it in video as well, so I might try and lash that up here as well, so people can watch that, because I think it's definitely worth a look. And you'll recognize Taig, like he was it Dead Cat Bounce? I can't remember the name. He did some very funny sketches with the people who went on to make the Cork-based comedy, the Unbelievables, the lads, the two Cork lads. Come on, Phil. I know you live in
Scully,
one of those. That's the new one. It's the good one.
Oh, I know the one. I can't remember.
The Cork one. You know what I'm talking about. The two lads. But very funny Taig, and very principled man. And it's like. You talk about grifters, and the one of the articles was like sort of going, look, he's only doing this because he's getting some sort of the spotlight, or he's using this terrible tragedy to for his own. And you just why would anybody, as he said himself, why would anybody choose to become a bit terroristy and side with Hezbollah to make money? I don't know if that's a thing.
It's a hell of a career choice all the time. It's like, okay, what's the most toxic thing I can do in the media world right now? I'm going to go and do that, Oh, my earnings have fallen off a cliff here completely, kind of thing, So, and the thing is as well, Keith, certain people you'll see them attach themselves to certain causes, right? And Facebook was brilliant for this in the beginning, because people would put up these filters, and it might be the flag of whatever had happened that week, Charlie Hebdo, just we anti all that kind of thing, and those things were sort of, but Taig has always been, in all the time I've known him, that's gone back a good few years now, he has always been the Irish national cause, and a 32 county republic is something that was he's always been very much an Irish nationalist, but he has always been very much pro-Palestinian and anti-Zionist in that sense as well, so it's not something that he just happened upon. It's not something that he saw on TikTok and was radicalized. He has had a very sort of radical and loud and angry view of these things for a long time,
He's always been there,
exactly.
And he talks about
so he didn't just
internationally recognized right to defend yourself, and that's it's not terrorism. But anyway, that's a whole other show. Anyway, it is a whole other show. It's there, and we're going to put it up and it'll be available to watch on MOTH. That's the whole other show we don't have time for. Thank God you did it already. Do you have a dick of the week, or should we just wrap it up?
That's going to go to the man who gave two fingers to the Irish public last week. That's a certain Mr. Michael Lowry. I just find it the big flaw in our democracy, right? We always think of a democracy as the people we elect and the institutions we elect them to, and it's not, right? It's the people as well. It's the decisions and the choices that we make. And as we spoke about on the housing podcast a few weeks back, people make a decision to protect the value of their home rather than to build social housing. They're hard democratic choices, but they're the things we do. People of Tipperary just keep putting Michael Lowry back in the Dáil. So to me, then that says they're okay with this guy being corrupt. Okay, that seems to be what they're up to. That's grand. Okay, but then you can't come complaining that social housing doesn't get built, right? You can't complaining that politicians are corrupt, or that they're pulling a stroke, or that they're doing these kind of things, or that they haven't even managed to form committees or any that got their feet under the table in their ministries yet, right? That's on you. You put them there, and you need to own that on a voter level, right? If you gave a ballot to this guy, or to anybody who supports Micheál Martin, or any of Micheál Martin's TDs, or Simon Harris's TDs, because they're all in the one boat now, then that's for you. But I think I think this might be the second time Michael Lowry has won it. So sure, congratulations. You're not up there with this stage. Yeah, exactly. You're not up there with the Jeff Leo of this world, who is like, just far out in front. If he is the Messi of the Dick of the Week, well, maybe he's the Trent Alexander-Arnold this week as Michael Lowry. So well on his way, though, to catch it up.
Yeah, I'll have to agree with you on that as well. And I do think, you don't have to wait. You don't have to wait for another election. You just have to be vocal about the issues. If they're not doing what you thought they would do, be vocal about it, write to them, complain, protest, take to the streets, organize yourselves. You don't have to wait till the next election.
Do you know what to do? Call them. Call the offices. All the numbers are on the Dáil website. Call their office, right? Writing to them, they'll ignore it, right? Call the office, let them know, because that is, and this is from being in Leinster House and from covering the place before, right? That is the only thing that will get their attention, is when the switchboard is lit up. So if you're not happy with what your government is doing, you let them know by calling them up tomorrow. So not the live line, the Dáil line.
Yeah, the Dáil. I think I'm getting from our producer getting word in the ear that Michael Lowry has won it twice.
Twice. That's incredible altogether. So he's up there, number 2 in the list now after Jeff Leo.
Phil, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much. Thank you very much to our guest, Angie. Al, I don't know where he is. He's off foreign somewhere, and he obviously wasn't able to join us. So Al, we'll have you back next week.
I reckon ICE have him. Did he go to America? ICE definitely have him. Look at the fella. I'd rope him in straight away.
I got off a plane in the UK yesterday, and they were checking passports on the way out. I was going, "Oh my God, it's happening!" But thankfully, they were looking for one individual who they escorted off and stopped looking. They didn't get to my passport, because you know what would happen then?
It was Al.
Thanks very much. Thanks a lot to here in Brown Bear as well. I'll never give them a mention. We will be back next week at 3 o'clock. But just keep an eye on the platform, because you never know when we pop up with some ad hoc brilliance. And check out the podcasts, Unvetted by Philip, and also some of the shows are podcasts as well. And there's loads going on. Just stay tuned. Keep an eye on MOTH. I tell you, there's stuff happening here. Have a good day. Enjoy the rest of your Friday, and have a great weekend. Good luck.